how was Rich? How great was that? Right? I mean, am I lucky or what? Seriously, am I like the lucky? I'm so lucky. That man is the reason I can stand here today, because when I met him 24 years ago, wow, I was afraid to say my name in a room of 10 people. I was that shy, and I would be sweaty palms and like feeling like I was going to throw up if I ever, even like in a church group, having to say anything publicly. So he signed me up for Toastmasters. Each day I would, like he said, you just little improvements. The first one, I said my name without fainting. The next time, I think I introduced myself and got through that. And then about a year later, I was speaking at their convention. So thank you, Rich. All right, so let's talk about what's coming. Anybody pretty sure what 2019 is going to look like? Feeling confident? You've got the answers? Yes? Come on up. All right. I just think I decided a few years ago to stop actually trying to make predictions, because some of my mentors who are always right with predictions, like Bruce Norris, he's always right. He had trouble this time because there's so much manipulation of the markets. If you take an economics class, it's not going to apply today. And I'm going to explain, of course, there are always fundamentals that will apply. But above that is some manipulation that's almost impossible to predict. So all we can do is our best at positioning ourselves in a way that it doesn't matter. That it doesn't matter. Whatever the powers that be do whatever they do, that we're sitting pretty. So I'm going to basically show a lot of headlines. I worked in the news business for many years. I'm sure you've heard that. I worked at CNN and KTVU and ABC News in the news writing department. And back then, there wasn't the internet. I know. Can you believe that? There was a day. So you had 4 news stations. There wasn't a lot of competition for your eyeballs, which is what news stations want. Today, there's thousands of outlets where you can get your news. So the headlines have to be even more intriguing to get your attention, which really, again, having been in the news business, that's what it's just about. How many eyeballs can we get to our station or our site? So I wanted to take some of those headlines today and look at them a little more deeply so that we don't freak out, so that we're not so easily manipulated by others and by those who have potentially influence over us. We can just ask more questions. Sometimes you just have to know what question that is. So here's the disclaimer. You all know it. You've seen it a lot, I'm guessing, if you've been on our webinars. But basically, do your own diligence. Speak to your own advisors. I am not an accountant. I'm not an attorney. I am an investor who's sharing my opinion, but always back it up with your own research, your own due diligence, and your own advisors. And I think Ben mentioned it earlier. We have created such an incredible network, and there's so much trust, because I think you know by now that we really care. We really care. And so sometimes people take that as a blind faith in us. And I want to say it again and back up Ben as don't do that, because I wouldn't have blind faith buying a property from my own mother. You have to do your own due diligence. You've got to do what it takes to make sure that you are buying the right investment for you. Okay? All right, so we're going to have all of this recorded up on our site. So, all right, so let's boil it down. This is really what it comes down to. Is these 3 things. Real estate values are tied to jobs. That's really as simple as it is, because population growth is tied to jobs. Jobs, of course, are tied to how well the economy is doing. And the economy, now this is the shift, this is the change that we have to be more aware of. The economy is no longer really based on what you learn in school about the economy, although supply and demand does still matter. But what matters more these days is the Fed policy, and so the Federal Reserve and the government policy. These two things are what are going to affect the economy more than ever. And the manipulation of that will either make you or break you. So you've got to understand these two things. Let's just go straight to, again, the Fed policy and what's happening. Again, if you've listened to me, any of my webinars, you've already heard this, but I'm going to say it again. The importance of understanding what happens when the Fed raises or lowers rates. So what happens when the Fed lowers rates? What does it do? Does it stimulate the economy? It's a stimulation measure. It's like cheap money. The cheaper money is, the more people will spend it and borrow it. When things get too heated, what does the Fed do? Raises. When money gets more expensive, we spend and borrow less of it and spend less of it. And our economy is so based on us spending money. Was it 80% of our economy is based on you and me shopping? Really, like it's about spending money. And that's how the Federal Reserve is able to control the economy by how much you're going to spend. If money's cheap and easy, I mean, let's face it. If I said, and I have been in a position to do this when I was a mortgage broker, but if I said, anybody want $2 million at 0% interest? Anybody? Yeah? Do you take it? All right. Anybody want $2 million at 20% interest? Nobody? No takers. So, I mean, again, it's that simple. When money's cheap, people will borrow it and hopefully make money on it. It's when they don't make money on it that there's a big problem, right? Because you got to pay that $2 million back. And if all you got is $1 million or $500,000 because it wasn't invested wisely or something happened, then we got a problem. So this chart basically is the history of the Fed raising rates. And if you look closely, you'll see that the lines, those gray lines, are recessions. And when you can see that the Fed raises rates, see, I can't really see it that well, but you can see with each line, there's a raising of rates to slow things down. So something happened when rates were low. Rates were low, stimulated the economy after recessions, then rates raised, and gosh darn it, they did it too fast or something happened. Who knows? But they didn't quite get it. Time after time after time, there was a raising of rates and then a massive drop, not a little drop, a over the cliff kind of drop. So why? You'd think after all these recessions, there would be some understanding of this connection that you better time it well or you're going to collapse the economy. If the Fed raises rates too quickly, we're going to feel it. So getting that timing down, it has not generally worked that well. So that's why you're going to see, I think there's just a couple times on there that there was rates going up and not a recession, like right here. Rates went up and it wasn't until here. So sometimes with the rate hikes, it maybe once or twice it flattened, otherwise it went off a cliff. So where are we right now? That's what we care about. Well, okay, we'll go to this slide first, the money supply. Now, when the Fed is tightening, again, it's trying to slow down a boom. And when it's loosening and basically lowering rates and offering more money, that's a boom. That creates a boom. And back in the early 70s, 71, I believe it is, Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. So it used to be that paper money, sure, it was just paper, but it represented money because it was tied to the amount of gold we had. In the early 70s, Richard Nixon took that away, and it no longer was tied to the gold that we had. So that just gave the Federal Reserve the freedom to print money, and it didn't have to be tied to anything, and gave the banking system the ability to create loans out of thin air without having to be tied to how much gold we have. And wow, when you have politicians who have the ability to make promises so they can get elected, and then have the Federal Reserve create as much money as they need to implement those programs, then that's a wonderful thing for a politician, isn't it? And we like it too, and that's why we're going to vote for the politicians that are going to give us the things we want, because there's become a mentality that if we want something and we vote for the right politician, we can have it because it can just be created. This is the result of taking us off the gold standard, and the amount of free money that just got thrown into the system, which is just really paper. The only reason it's valuable at all is because the government says it is. This is not anything that's ever happened before. So we have a massive money supply, money that was just created out of thin air. And how is that going to turn out? We don't know. So we've got to be very cautious and very careful moving forward, understanding that a lot of our economy is based on monopoly money, where a lot of extra boxes of money were brought into the game. And when you look at any chart, whether it's the stock market or the housing market, you're going to see this similar trend. Because like I said, if I could give you all $2 to $5 to $10 million, you'd take it. And some of you would invest it really well, and others would lose it, but you'd take it. And if you didn't take it, well, then maybe you haven't studied enough about investing, because once you've studied investing, you're going to take all the money you can get to invest it. So, and that's what a lot of corporations have done. So again, with this in mind, regardless of all this noise we hear about politicians and Republicans and Democrats and this and that, that is noise. What it comes down to is the money. It's the money. And the fact that the U.S. somehow negotiated that the U.S. dollar would be the new gold standard. That was an amazing negotiation tool that maybe at some point some other countries will say, how did that become fair? But until that happens, somehow our money is considered the new gold standard. We have to be aware that that can change. So here is what the Federal Reserve has been doing as of late, because again, your success depends on understanding this now, in this world we live in now. And unfortunately, most people don't. So when our economy flatlined, anybody see The Big Short? Like, it's scary because, right, our economy was dead, completely collapsed. And a lot of people don't really understand just how severe it was, but it flatlined. And so the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates to near zero. Like I said, free money, just zero interest, just take it, and to get this economy going again. And that was for nearly a decade of free money. And so again, the headlines will be all about this and that policy. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with the fact that we lowered rates and have the ability to print money, enough money to get things revived. So we solved the problem simply by printing more money. Nobody earned that money, it was just created. Then, when things started to rev up and it worked, because there's something amazing about pouring $10 trillion into an economy. It actually worked. Things started picking up, and we've had job creation. We've had housing prices go up. We've had the stock market go up. Remember, it only has to do with this. And then at one point, the Fed's like, okay, we got to slow it down. Because on one of my prior webinars, I don't remember when it was, but it was basically like when an economy gets too hot, then we have a whole new set of problems, which is inflation, right? Because you've got all these jobs, you've got so much money being passed around that prices go up, and it becomes unsustainable. Does that sound like a message we've heard? Affordability is the word of the day. Lack of, for a lot of things. And it has to do with that. So much money poured into the economy that prices go up so fast, but people who don't know how to play the game are really lost, don't know what to do. So that's number 2 thing to understand, is you got to know how to play this game, or you'll get left behind. So I'm glad you're here. So in, end of 2005, a teeny weeny rate hike, Let's see if our economy can handle that. It did. Then the next year, 3 more, then more. And then this past year, I was wrong on my predictions last year. I did not think that the Fed would raise rates 4 times because it's risky. It's like I said, it's risky to raise rates too quickly. That cliff can happen. But they did, because the economy has been revving so hot. The reason I was wrong on my predictions, and so was Bruce Norris, so it makes me feel better because he's really smart, is neither of us predicted the tax cuts. The tax cuts came in at the last hour, and I'd already done my predictions, so that is totally my excuse for it. They came in at the last hour, and that was a new form of stimulus. Again, important to understand, you've got opposing forces. You've got a Federal Reserve tightening, and then all of a sudden, bam, you've got new stimulus. So that it's confusing to the economy. What are we slowing down? Are we speeding up? Well, the gains that you saw this year have a lot to do with the tax cuts, the economy churning. My goodness, it better have had a result, right? Those tax cuts, you would think there would be an impact, and there certainly was this year. So that's why somehow the Fed was able to raise 4 times without the economy collapsing, because of the tax cuts. So here, this is the headline news that you're seeing a lot. Has anybody been concerned about some of the headlines you've seen that say things like, oh, real estate is struggling, and it's some words I can't say, but it's dropping, and be careful. And existing home sales fall for the 6th straight month in September. Come on, isn't that terrifying? If you don't know anything about this business, are you going to go out and buy a house? Especially when 10 years ago, you're still licking your wounds, or you saw your parents go through, losing everything just 10 years ago. So, these are scary headlines, and it's upsetting that I'm aligned with a news industry that's intent is to scare you, and without having the real facts and data, because the impact is not good. Because when you see a headline like this, guess what? People are going to buy less, so it's going to feed itself. When in fact, when you read the fine print, all it is the pace of sales has dropped. The speed at which people are buying homes has slowed, but prices are up for, I think it was like the 60th straight month or something. Is it in there? So yeah, the price is up on a trajectory, but pace slowing. So when you look under the headlines, what is this? Is this good news or bad news? Guess it depends, right? It depends. For whom is it good for when the pace of sales slows? Buyers, especially when it's been just a frantically crazed market. So a little breathing room is actually wonderful. So the headline should say, real estate is finally stabilizing. That's what it should say. Finally, if you want to go look for a house, there might be something for sale, right? 6 months ago, was anybody in the middle of a 1031 exchange and couldn't find any property through our network? Anybody? Oh, thank goodness. Okay, wait, 1 or 2. No, I had a really close friend who had a big exchange. She had a $2 million exchange, and she needed 20 properties in 45 days. Now, normally, we're really good at that. That's what we're known for, is assisting in that process, because we have 14 to 15 teams nationwide that each could give you a few houses. Like, we can facilitate that with some form of ease, but not last year. In the beginning, from January till June, it was awful, and I felt sorry for anyone in the middle of an exchange because there was nothing to buy. It was terrible. And then, of course, it makes us look terrible. There's a couple of comments, they had nothing for us. There was no inventory. It just wasn't there. And now, if you're in the middle of an exchange, there'll be something for you to buy. And you'll have your pick, but not an overwhelming amount, and prices aren't going down, so it's not like you're getting the bargain of the year. You're just not going to have to compete with 1,000 people for no property. So that's all. This is good news. And that's why I am constantly trying to get on national news to explain the headlines and what they really mean, because it's not my job to scare you. It's my job to encourage you to make the right decisions, which I wish more media would do. This was a big headline. And I show this slide because we did see a big slide in stocks in December. This is something I was right about in terms of when the Fed raises rates, I believed it would hit the stock market more than it would hit housing. Because housing it's a different deal. You can't create a house overnight, although that could change. Always pay attention. I just talked to somebody who was talking about the 3D printing of houses. So you might be able to print a house overnight soon. But you just got to get the permits to do it, and that's a whole other process. But it takes a while. And with labor costs, at least currently, again, anything can change with technology, but currently, labor costs have gone up, material costs have gone up, the amount of time it takes to get the permits to build has lengthened. So it is hard to bring on new inventory in housing. And so we have so little housing available and so much demand, which I'll show you in a bit on more slides, that I just really wasn't worried about the housing market being that affected by raising rates. I mean, if they raised them real fast, too high, yes. But in fact, mortgage rates haven't gone up that much. But I thought the stock market would feel it more. And sure enough, when the Fed raised rates in December, there was a big impact on the stock market in some companies that were nervous about rates going up, because there are a lot of companies on the stock market that borrowed a lot of money when it was free, and now they're having trouble just making the interest payments on that borrowed debt. And as short-term rates go up with the Fed, they're having trouble, so they're going to have to do layoffs. So I knew that it would get affected. Sure enough, this is important for me to show, because if you invested in the S&P or in the Dow, you might have ended up below where you started at the end of the year. The reason I bring that up is I see so many times people coming to me saying, oh my gosh, I had a tenant move out and I had 2 or 3 months vacancy. What am I going to do? And Ben gets these calls all the time, like they're just freaking out. They've lost all this money. And then when we look at it, it's like, oh, your return just went down from 8% to 5%, because of this vacancy. But, it's like you've been trained that this is normal in the stock market, but when it happens in real estate, people freak out. So it's really important to understand that in the housing market, you still have your asset. You still have that thing you bought that has intrinsic value. In a stock market, it can just come and go quickly. It's a much faster moving vehicle and much more affected by the raising rates. All right, so with all this in mind, my prediction for the GDP this year is that we probably will end up around 3%, which was President Trump's goal this year for the economy, 3%. And he probably got it. And a lot of that has to do with the tax cuts, because otherwise we have the Fed tightening, which is meant to slow it down. So it didn't slow down. It gained momentum, again, in large part because of the tax cuts. Next year, or I should say this year, I still believe that there's so much momentum in the economy that I don't believe we'll see a crash or a recession this year. There's too much momentum still from the tax cuts. A lot of economists are saying, okay, then it's coming in 2020. And I'm not so sure about that, because again, there's so much momentum with job openings that it would take massive rate hikes for it to come to a screeching halt. But like I said, whatever the Fed does, that's going to have the impact. But I don't think President Trump is going to let the Fed raise rates too much. He doesn't have any control over them. They are separate entities, and he has stated he does, don't be raising rates on my dime. But they did it anyway. So that's bold, right? And there was, of course, an effect of the stock market. So they are separate opposing entities that have conflicting agendas. It's very strange and I think unprecedented. So the Fed kind of won on that one. But even with that said, there's so much growth happening that I'm not predicting a recession in 2020, again, unless a couple of things happen that would be unexpected that I'll talk about in future slides. But this headline is really important to see and to start questioning. There's been a lot of talk about creating jobs, right? That's what got President Trump into office. He's going to create jobs. What's interesting about that is we have more jobs than we have people to fill them. And the people who might ordinarily fill them are not, many are not being allowed into the country. So we have jobs and not the people to fill them, and yet there's still this push to create more jobs and to stimulate the economy. So how is this going to play out? It is, again, the year of conflicting agendas. How will this play out, at least in the real estate world? Well, when you have too many job openings, who is that good for? There's a pro and a con to everything, right? For people looking for work, right? Now there's lots of work, so that's great. People are back to work. Who is it bad for? Employers. Because you got to attract people, so you have to pay them more and give more benefits, and that increases costs. Who is going to swallow those costs? Consumer. Do you think the companies are going to take a hit? They're going to pass it on to us as consumers. What happens when we're paying more for things? It's inflation. What happens when there's inflation? The Fed has to raise rates. So it is it's the same with tariffs. You've got tariffs for political reasons, but in fact, it's creating an increase in costs, which is inflation, which then has the Fed going, uh-oh, I got to raise rates. And that's what President Trump doesn't want. So it's a conflict. I don't want to get political, so I'm going to just look at my predictions. So unemployment, typically a healthy unemployment level would be between 4% and 6%. Because there's always people, as one of our developers says, the chronically unemployed. There's a certain group of people that just are unemployable. So it's usually around that 4 to 6%. It could be illness, it could be whatever. The reason there's a certain amount of people that are not employed, or they're not have the right education for the jobs available today. But we are down below that. What's so interesting about this slide is that when you see low unemployment, that's down here, this is when the economy's chugging along, right? Low unemployment. This is considered a positive. When we see headline news and we see Fox News or whatever, and they're talking about, wow, the lowest unemployment ever. What an economy. What they're not seeing is this slide, that every time the unemployment rate gets this low, something happens that increases job loss and rising unemployment. Every time you have low unemployment and something happens, bam, people lose jobs. Low unemployment, people lose jobs. Look at that. Not slowly, no soft landing. It's like overnight. Did I scare you? Sorry. What is it that you think might be happening when unemployment gets so low? It's exactly what I said. Now, inflation. because employers have to pay people more, that it creates inflation, the Fed has to raise rates, they don't do it slow enough, bam, we got a recession. This is what you have to pay attention to moving forward. This is where we are right now. Right now, we're here. Where we don't want to be is here, or do we? What happens to real estate here when unemployment's high? Real estate gets cheap. So if you're prepared for that, that could be a beautiful day, right? If you're not, then if you're believing the headlines, which the masses do, then you're going to get caught shocked. Because like, what happened? Why did everything turn on a dime? So I heard a good economist say, he's predicting that there will be an uptick in unemployment just to normalize. So that's the intention I'm holding, is that the Fed raises rates nice and gently, and there's just a small amount of layoffs that the economy can handle. And it would just be jobs that, we got to be aware, what kind of jobs would be lost? And where are the jobs that will continue to grow? That is the key. Which jobs are here to stay? Which jobs are going to, be cut out? So when you look at this chart, we're talking about 90, even at the worst, you still got 90% employed, right? So it's not, when we see these charts, it's scary, but you have to remember, it's a small percentage. There's still 90% of the population employed, even in the worst recession, so where are they? We want to be investing there, where the jobs are. So again, how will all of this affect housing? How can you be prepared for the changes, knowing that the changes are here and coming, and the last 10 years will not be the next 10 years, not a chance. Not a chance. Just, I'll take questions at the end. Oh, I did? What'd I skip? I can't see the slides. Rich said we should have a big screen here. What bullet point did I skip?
The last one, tax.
Oh, you're right.
Cuts.
Okay. All right. I'll look on here. Okay. Why do I think that we won't have a recession? Thank you. Well, we've got the rising rates, and the decline in export. So I think that we won't. The last bullet point is basically saying why I don't think we'll have massive growth. A lot of people do believe that with the incentives of our administration that there will be more boom. And the reason I don't see that, I see a slowing, is again the Fed fund rate, decline in exports because of the tariffs, and our high, massive debt. And that people are going to start realizing that the tax cuts weren't so great for the wealthy. And it's the wealthy who are in the high-priced markets, the high-cost properties, and in the stock market. So that is really what most people that I speak to and interview on the show are saying is the Achilles heel today is us. Really. It's the San Francisco Bay Area. It's LA, it's the high-priced market, Seattle, New York. These are the areas that are teetering on the unknown. So we want to be really careful. If you're doing high-end flips, if you own a home, an expensive home in California that you're not sure you're going to stay in for a long time, you really need to pay attention that it's the high end that's getting hit. People all of my friends I know who are flippers are saying, we're busy on the affordable level, but everyone who's got higher end homes, those properties are sitting.
Hey, Kathy, what do you think about Denver? Do you think they're one of those?
Parts of Denver. So the difference is Denver's not that expensive compared to other places, right? So I'll show you a slide on Dallas that I think will relate to Denver. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think I got that. So again, GDP, we're still chugging along here in the US. Look at that GDP growth. Looks a lot like that money supply slide, doesn't it? But yeah, we got strong GDP growth. We've got strong population growth. We have I think it's about 25 million more residents in the US than we did during the last recession. That has an impact. Along with that, you've got a very large generation that's just coming into homeownership, the millennials. They're just forming households and they are employed. They're coming into a job market that exists. Whereas 10 years ago, those young people were coming into no job market. So that's an important demographic to think about, that people buying homes today at age, in their mid-30s, 31 is the average age typically. 10 years ago, they came into the job market in the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression. They couldn't get jobs for years. They struggled. Now they've got jobs. Now things are better. They're terrified to buy a home. They're terrified what's going to happen. They see headlines like that and they're like, no thanks, I'm happy to rent. So, but the younger people don't necessarily have that. People coming out of college and forming households. So either way, we have household formation. We have wage growth. Again, all of these charts look a lot like that money supply chart, don't they? And then this is an interesting slide, and again, an important one to pay attention to is our interest rates. And this is long-term interest rates. So the slide I showed before was the Fed fund rate. That is the short-term overnight rate that banks lend to each other on. It's very different. So if a bank is borrowing money at 0% and lending it to you for 4%, they're making the 3% spread and they're giving you the loan for 4%. So this is different. The long-term interest rate is really not so connected to the Fed raising rates. When the Fed raise rates, that's the economy. That's stimulating or tightening the economy. Mortgage rates are tied to bonds. It's tied to investor confidence. Mortgage rates are tied to investor fears and confidence. When investors worldwide are afraid, they buy US bonds and they buy long-term mortgage rates. It's a great investment, usually, unless you have liar loans. But usually, long-term interest. So when people are scared, they're going to take a low return and they're going to invest in these things and rates go down. When the economy's booming, then all those investors aren't afraid anymore and they start investing in the stock market. Nobody's investing in mortgages or bonds, and then rates go up. So it's really just kind of based on investors. And what we're seeing here is that, so historically speaking, interest rates are really still super low. And they actually went down even after the Fed raised rates in December. Why? If the Fed is saying, whoa, we have an overheated economy, and then investors are flocking to the safety of bonds and mortgage rates, what's going on there? There's fear, yeah. There's fear that the Fed's going to raise rates too quickly and we're going to just hide out in mortgages and bonds. But this is the message that needs to get out to young people forming households. These are really low interest rates. For them, it's sticker shock. They were seeing, and I feel the same way, don't you? Oh, don't you want another 3% mortgage? Rich and I were almost getting an amazing refi, and then the appraiser came back and he wanted our deck, fixed. So we were in the middle of building a new deck. Oh, by the way, we still don't have permits on that 3 years later. So we couldn't get the refi. We had such a low rate, and now rates are up, and they're still so historically low. But for us, it's like, nah, we're just going to keep the loan we have. So a lot of people coming into the housing market today are like, I'm not paying 5%, even though I think it's like 4.5% still. We'll probably see some really good housing numbers next month because rates are so low right now. But again, important to see, isn't it interesting that rates are so low and yet we still have kind of a stall in the housing market? Kind of an interesting notice, right? I wonder why. That's why. That's why. So it's not so much about the rate, it's about the home prices continually climbing. And it's reached its affordability max for a lot of people. So even the slightest uptick in interest rates, even though they're already low, is is having people not qualify as much as they could have before, and they're forced to rent, and along with their debt. We have consumer debt at all-time highs, and that really makes it tough to get a loan. So even if you could qualify, if you've got that debt, you're not going to get the loan, because these are real loans now. The difference between now and 10 years ago, you have to qualify. You have to qualify. So you can't really compare this market to the 2000s. And the big one is the student loan debt. To really understand the people that are supposed to be buying homes right now, typically at this stage, which would be the mid-30s or early 30s, they have a lot of debt, unprecedented debt. Look at that. Takes 21 years to pay off a student loan on average, and there's 44 million borrowers of student loans with $1.5 trillion in student loan debt. It used to be about 5% of what you earned went to student loan debt. It's up to 10 to 20%. And that is having a massive impact on people's ability. And if it's going to take them 20 years, they're not going to be buying their first home till they're 40, a lot of them. So a lot of people say, oh, they're forming families later. I don't know that it's that. It's the ability. Young people today are so smart. They're so smart. If they could buy a home and lock in a payment, and they're going to do it for the most part. But if it doesn't make sense, or they can't, they won't. So the bottom line is, with all this data, it sure seems like it's going to be a renter's nation for a while. So for those of us in the room who want to create a retirement, want to create passive income, we're in this really incredible scenario where you've got, again, household growth, you've got population growth, you've got higher wages, but you have people unable to buy homes, but they want to live in one. So that means we can provide that for them. Let's see. Let me read this. The renter rate in the U.S. rose in 50 of the largest metros by 5% from 2006 to 2016, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. These are some slides from someone I have tremendous respect for, and as long as I show who it is, I get to use it. John Burns Real Estate Consulting. Anybody got to hear him speak? Or on my show, I've had the honor of having him on the show. He does data for home builders, and he actually does consulting for our land development projects that we're doing. Almost 12% of Americans now rent a single-family home. Isn't that interesting? It's gone up massively, this demand and desire to still live in a home, but maybe I don't want to own it. Maybe I just want to rent it and let someone else take care of it. And here you can see the percentages between single and multifamily, and I can't read it from here. So, anybody can read it? Let's see. 16 million in single family? Okay. 28 million multifamily renters and 16 million single family rentals, and it is evening out. That's why when I go to places like IMN Single Family Rental Conference, and I'm sitting with some of the biggest hedge fund guys on Wall Street that are investing in single family homes. When I was young, when my dad was investing, it was apartments. That's what people rented. People owned homes and people rented apartments. And so big firms, big funds, that's what they did. They built multifamily. That's changed today, and Wall Street's saying, no, we want to figure out the single family thing. We all thought they'd fail. I was sure, right, Tim? Where are you? Did you think they'd figure it out? They did, didn't they? Yep. So they did. They came into our mom and pop business. We were like laughing. How are these Wall Street guys going to figure out how to manage a portfolio of single family homes? They're going to screw it up. And a lot did. But a lot are doing really well, and they are increasing their holdings. They have about 3 to 5% of the market right now, and at the conferences I go to, they are looking at increasing it to 10% of all single-family inventory they intend to own. So if that tells you anything, they are increasing their investment in single-family. Not that I don't like multifamily, but there's a reason why there's a benefit to single family. What's a big one? What's a big benefit to owning a portfolio of single family? Appreciation, yep. For us, long-term fixed rate loans, you don't get that in multifamily. If you can max out your fixed rate loan.
Sorry. I've got the mic ready if you're.
You own the land, liquidity. Another one is when you look at the demographic, remember I said that these young people are not going to be able to own a home for a while, maybe in 10 years. So you're going to own what they're going to want to buy. They're not going to maybe buy the multifamily, but when that massive population's ready to buy, you got it.
We've got a question over here.
Yes.
What do you think the long-term impact, like with over a 10-year period, will be of Wall Street owning such a large portion of single-family homes?
It's a really good question. And is it warm in here? Because I am warm. It could just be all my sparkles. I don't know. Let's get some air. No, wait, no one needs a hot flash right now. Okay. All right. The long-term impact. A lot of us have been really scared. Boy, I don't know, Tim, do you have an answer? You've been at these, I don't want to put you on the spot, but.
That's okay. No, I think.
Because he runs our single-family
Yeah.
rental fund that we currently have.
Well, all right, thank you. Yeah, no, the way I see it is there's plenty out there. Even if they increase what they're going to take, there's still plenty out there. And it shows that we're on the right track and we're doing the right things. And we've actually been able to benefit from a lot of stuff that they developed that we never would have thought of. So that's the benefit now. We're still in their system that they brought into the single-family house that was never there before. So I see it just making us better.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of been the general consensus at these conferences, where now there are tools and systems and softwares that never existed when it was just mom and pops. When it was just, there's 8 million Americans who own one single-family home. That is not organized. It's not organized at all. It's just a bunch of people. I mean, who's had a really terrible property manager? All of us. So because there wasn't a system. I remember when we worked with thousands of Australian investors and they came here to buy cheap property in 2010 through our network. And the property was cheap, but then they would work with our property managers and be like, man, you guys it's the worst. Because they actually have systems in Australia. It's like it's actual industry. But here, there wasn't. It was just maybe a realtor or a mom, somebody who just was managing their own properties. So they took on a few more, and it was just a disaster. So as much as we tried, we see the benefit of investing in real estate, you got to deal with the property management. But that has increased and improved in the last decade because of the hedge funds, like Tim said. They have brought in systems that are changing the game and making it a legitimate investment. Now, property management's everything, and we don't control that. We are not property managers. We just try to find the best ones, but they are not perfect by any means, but they're getting better because they have access. So we try to find the property management teams that have access to all these new tools. And if you hear my most recent real estate news show, 2019 is supposed to be the year where the tech industry, Silicon Valley, is diving in headfirst into the real estate industry with new tech. It's going to be transformational, what's coming this year. So expect changes. Expect the fact that sometimes change is difficult, but we're going to see more tools and systems, and it really is thanks to the hedge fund guys. They are buying something different than we're buying. In answer to your question, we're not buying the same stuff. They're not even in opportunity zones, which we're going to talk about. They don't want to do it because it's a deep value add and takes a lot of renovation. They're not doing it. So they're too big to turn. We sat with them and they're like, no. I think we were on a panel with them, or one of us was, but they're not interested. They're not doing it. Well, we're all over it. So we're playing beneath them, so to speak. They have a very specific, product that they're looking for, and it's fairly new. Doesn't really cash flow. It's in places like Dallas where we kind of look at it and go, wow, there's no return at all. They're just buying different things. So I don't see it as a problem, and they're not going to cannibalize themselves. A lot of us worried that, oh my gosh, they're so big, they're just going to dump all their holdings and move on to a different industry and leave us with all this inventory. They're not going to do that. They have right now, the hedge funds only own about I don't know, 300,000 homes or something. It's not very many. I mean, that's a lot, but there's, like I said, 8 million Americans who own a rental property. We still way outnumber them, way outnumber Wall Street, but they're helping us get organized and step up our game. They're not gonna just all of a sudden flood the market with property. That's only gonna hurt them. So what it is doing, and this is an actual stat, that the hedge funds raised their rents much, like 7% or something last year. I totally don't have the data in front of me, but it was about 7% when the national average was about 3 or 4%. So what they are doing is raising rents because they have a little bit higher end product. Okay, so this slide, I'm sure you've seen a bunch of times. This is when, in 2012, Rich and I were on vacation actually on a conference. He was at the conference and I was on vacation. And I got a call that Fox News wanted someone to debate Robert Shiller live. And Robert Shiller didn't want to debate anyone. He refused. So they said, how about this lady out in California? He's like, I've never heard of her. Sure, yeah, I'll do that. Okay, so I showed up in my daughter's sweater because I had nothing to wear, and Fox News has the best makeup artist in the world. You look 20 years old with Fox makeup. It's like mud, like you can't see a single wrinkle. It's amazing. I want to find out what it is. Anyway, that was, I got to show up. And this was very interesting because Robert Shiller should know a thing or two about the housing market, right? He's created the Case-Shiller Index. Yes, and in 2012, he said in this debate, I'm very worried about the American people. They should not be buying. It's a terrible time to buy. Oh my. So if you see right there, this was 2012. Is that a bad time to buy? It was the bottom. It was the bottom. So on that debate, it's on our website. I was like, no. Interest rates are at all-time lows. Home prices are all-time lows. People can lock in payments for 30 years at a fixed rate that is a third or a fourth of what they'd pay in rent. So how is it a bad time? It makes no sense. And at the end of the interview, he agreed with me, and I won the debate. So, yes. And it was really a matter of San Francisco State versus Yale. Go San Francisco. Yeah. So what was interesting about that is just like how could he not know that it was the best time? And all the headline news was saying the same thing. When prices were here, the headline news was saying, great time to buy. Look at all this money you can make in real estate. That's all they're looking at. And then they're looking at, look at all the money you can lose in real estate. They're not seeing this. What we were seeing back then, we were buying, do I have another slide on this? Nope, okay. Rich and I were buying real estate in Texas when this is Texas down there, the red. Yes. This is the average home price nationally, and California was up here during the peak. I'm not joking, it was like 500 and something thousand, it was up here. And we were so lucky to have the Real Wealth Show and to interview. I mean, honestly, I started that show just so I could have free education from great people. It was like my listeners got to benefit from my desire to learn from people like Robert Kiyosaki. Would talk to me. He would never talk to me otherwise. So he's the one who said, sell, get out of California and buy in Texas. And so Rich and I did. We started buying a bunch of property in Texas when everyone thought we were crazy because they're like, look at this boom you're missing out on in California. And we had some property in California and we got to enjoy that boom too. But for a long-term investment, he was explaining that job growth and population growth was so strong in Dallas that you had this opportunity to buy and cash flow, but also see prices go up because they were undervalued. They were undervalued the same time, the same year that California was 10 times overvalued. Same time. So you can't listen to a statistic and say, oh, housing isn't good. It's just not true. You've got to look at it and say, what does this mean? And who is this good for? And who is this bad for? And question everything. So this time, we had the chance to sell California at the top and buy a bunch of property in Texas. And those who listened did not feel a recession. They did not feel the massive recession. They never experienced this. They experienced this. They sold here, they bought here, and they experienced cash flow and equity growth. That's the opportunity you have today still, to cash in and reposition. You've got to reposition. You've got to look at your portfolio. This is not a sleeper industry. You don't invest and go to sleep for 30 years and hope your investments turned out. Look at every single thing you own or want to own. Sell the dogs. Rich and I just sold one. This feels so good. I can't believe someone bought it. It was just a disaster. It closed this week, and I just feel like I'm floating. I feel bad for them, but all my stuff is online. It's not like I was lying, and I disclosed everything. But, whew, I'm so glad we sold. It's actually a property that's being attacked by environmental groups, specifically the Coastal Commission. I was like, they're fining $11,000 a day until there's beach access to the surfers. So someone bought it with that, disclosed. Anyway, reposition. Get rid of anything that might get affected by the changing tides, and the tides are changing. It's like I've said this before, when Rich and I go surfing, we're very aware of what the tide is. Because when it's low tide, guess what happens? Rich goes surfing and he lands on a rock, don't you, honey? Yeah. Like, he went flying in the air and landed on a rock. I'm like, you can't go out in low tide. He's like, oh, yeah. So then he's finally better. Like, for 3 weeks he was out. Anyway, you got to know, a high tide, there's other things to watch for. You got to know what the tides are. And the tides are changing. So look at your portfolio and say, this one hasn't been really a performer. Let's see what I could do instead. A lot of people say buy and hold forever, and maybe that's true for certain things, but I also think it's important to look at the portfolio and decide, is it time to reposition? Okay, so if you were to sell your high-priced property that's just not performing and you were to go somewhere else, of course, where would you go? This is another John Burns slide. It's just basically showing local government. Remember I said there were two things to pay attention to, the Federal Reserve and local government and government policy in general. So certain governments want growth. The reason we invested in Texas 10, 15 years ago was because of government policy. It was because the government was giving incentives for businesses to move there. And businesses were moving there and creating jobs, and then people were moving there, but housing couldn't be built fast enough. So these will all be online, by the way. So where is local government policy, where local government policies have driven where the growth occurs? So you'll see really the South, Florida, look at that, Texas. This next slide will even show more. And again, these will be online. You'll be able to see them. This is being recorded. The area where John Burns expects to see the largest growth over the next 10 years and how he's counseling home builders like us is this. The largest growth will be in the southeast. Look at that, the red line. Texas is next. Now, Texas, we're not getting great cash flow, not like some other markets, but you know what? When you look at these slides, you kind of go, well, maybe it'll still be a good thing. Florida, number 3. What I love about Florida is you get cash flow and growth. Southwest next, Northeast. California's down there. It's still not terrible, but it's just not the best. And then the Midwest, down the green line, Central, and then Northwest. So a lot of people will say to me, what about Portland? What about Seattle? I don't make this stuff up. It's at the bottom. Sorry, I just did a live forecast for a group in Seattle before I came in here today, and I should have showed them the slide. Because everybody's like, look at all the growth there. But yes, that was the last 10 years. You can't pay attention what's coming. Okay, let's see. The uneven expansion, again, this is by city, and I won't go into it too detailed, but it's not a level playing field, is it? So when you're seeing, okay, the economy is going to slow down, that's an average. That's an average. What matters most is where are the jobs going, what specific city, what specific neighborhood in that city, and that's where you want to be so that you don't feel a recession. This is where, this is again just showing some migration patterns. You can see a lot, let's see. Sorry, I have to keep looking at the slide. Yeah, the lighter colors are where you're seeing less migration. The darker colors are where you're seeing migration. Okay, so this is, as you know, some of you are new and some of you have been around for years. These are the markets that we see cash flow and potential equity growth. Nobody can predict equity growth. However, just like when we bought 15 years ago, Rich and I were saying, wow, there's all this job growth, all this population growth, but you can't build houses nearly as quickly as are needed to keep up with all that. So there's probably going to be appreciation as well. These are the areas that we see for that. On that list of hot cities where it showed growth, Houston was at the top. We have an amazing team in Houston. Jacksonville was very close to the top. Indianapolis was there. Minneapolis, we have a team there. Tampa. These were all at the top of that list of where the jobs are going over the next 10 years. These are cities that Amazon did, their big search for their HQ too, and these cities ended up on their list, and it was hard to get on that list. There were hundreds, if not thousands of cities trying to get on it, and they made the top 10 or 20. Can't remember. But Pittsburgh, Detroit, Huntsville, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Chico, California. I just put that on there because 14,000 homes were burned down. There's going to be massive demand for housing there. You just have to figure out how to get it there. All right, so that's why we have these lists of markets. Like, why are we interested in these markets? What's happening there? It's that we want to be diversifying, because if you have one property in San Jose, for example, that you paid maybe $300,000 or $400,000 for, and now it's worth $1 million, and you're going, maybe I'm getting $2,000, $3,000 a month on that. Is there something else I can do with this property? And there is, because if you sell that property and you're able to buy 10 properties in these areas, now you've really well diversified yourself so that if there's a recession, remember we've already established it doesn't hit the whole country, it just hits parts of the country. But if you've diversified into cities that are showing on the charts that they are expected to grow, and you have taken one property and turned it into 10, your chances are much better, right? Instead of that one property in an area that's teetering. And then if you have a vacancy in your one San Jose place, rental, that's going to hurt. You're 100% vacant. You have no income coming in. You've got carrying costs. If you have instead sold it and bought 10 properties elsewhere and you have one vacancy, how will that feel? You're going to still go on your vacation, right? It's not that big a deal. If you were 50% vacant on those 10 properties, 5 vacancies, how would that feel versus 100%? You could hold your carrying costs, right, in a downturn. These are the kinds of things you've got to be aware of. Even if you have a property with a lot of equity, you have carrying costs, a lot of them. And that's what people forget to look at. You've got taxes, you've got insurance, you've got repairs, all these things. And if you have vacancies, those things increase. So you want to make sure that you don't have all your eggs in one basket, but instead are diversified so that there's money coming in from lots of different sources. You had asked about Denver, and I think Denver is pretty similar to this Dallas slide. Again, Rich and I bought back here when prices were flat. Everyone thought we were super crazy. Why would you buy when there's nothing happening there and like prices are going up so quickly in California? Well, this is why. Because we bought super cheap, we cash flowed the whole way, and then just got to ride it up. Now, a lot of people will say, well, shoot, is it too late to invest in a place like Dallas? Look at that. Is it going to crash? The difference is, and this is true for Denver and several other cities, it's not the same place. This Dallas today is not the Dallas of that day. Not even close. Not even close. Has anyone been to Dallas lately? Is it the same place it was 10 years ago? Not a chance. There is so much new development, so much new growth, so much infrastructure, so much more. You can't make this comparison. So all this is the new Dallas. So where will it go from here? I feel like this is just the new set point. It's still affordable. Nobody's really stretched, although it is slowing down like everywhere else in the high end. But the affordable range, there's so much demand, so much demand. And that's the same with Denver. What's different in Denver today than 10 years ago? One thing, lots of marijuana. Yeah, lots of it. And that attracted a lot of young people, right? It was like the cool city for a long time. It was the only one. And a lot of health, a lot of that industry moved there. A lot of growth, a lot of young people. And city has taken off. It's not the same city. So you can't compare today's prices with 10 years ago when there's been that much transformation. And is it still affordable? That's really the question to ask. Can the average person afford the average home? It's definitely hitting some affordability issues in certain markets, but there's a lot of markets. Now you look at another area maybe that hasn't really changed that much, but their prices have gone up. Well, that's just, that's more risky. Okay, in Detroit, like one of the reasons we like a city like Detroit is you could see it hasn't totally got back to its prior levels, and that is a city that has transformed. It's not the same city at all, and it's transforming. So we think there's still a lot of room for price appreciation while you're cash flowing, as long as you're in the right neighborhoods. Somebody heard me talk on Wednesday in LA, and they're like, "You're right. I looked up Detroit prices. I could buy a property for $5,000." I'm like, don't do that. Don't do that. You've got to buy in the right neighborhoods where there's growth and where you're going to have tenants who will pay you. Cleveland. What's happening in Cleveland? What's the big industry there? Healthcare. If you don't know what's happening in Cleveland in regards to healthcare, you need to look into it. Tim lives there. He's our director of affiliates. He manages all the affiliates nationwide. Talk to that guy in the back if you have any questions about our markets. He has managed them so well. As you know, doing these masterminds, helping everybody improve, sharing best practices. But he lives in Cleveland, and we met because he worked for a company we were working with before. And again, it's not the same city. Is Cleveland the same city it was 10 years ago?
Not even close.
Not at all. 20 years ago? No. So, again, it's just lots of, and is healthcare something we'll see more of or less of in the future? We are getting old, okay? So we're going to see more healthcare. All right. So moving forward, these are all things we've already been doing, looking for the best places for both cash flow and equity growth, because I want both. I think cash flow alone is boring, and I think equity growth alone is extremely speculative. But when you can make a great combo and have both, that is a recipe for wealth building, and I love it. I'm obsessed with it. So what is just so exciting is the fact that now the thing that we're already doing and already love and already know already know inside and out, which is buying in the path of progress, buying cheap where the growth is headed, getting there before anybody else knows about it, cash flowing, and then enjoying the appreciation along the way, so you're kind of set either way. Now we get an added tax benefit from that. The things that we have been doing anyway. Now the government's saying, well, if you do that, we're going to give you a massive, unprecedented tax benefit for doing what we in this room are already doing. You just have to do it a little bit differently, and of course we'll go over that. But the buzzword of the year is this opportunity zone. Now, if you can't take advantage of the tax benefits, you can take advantage of the opportunity zone, because these are the zones. You just go online. These are areas that the government, each metro area got into the tax bill at the end of the year, It's not finalized yet. You all know about this already, but these are areas that the government across the country have decided these are areas we want to see improve. We want to have investor dollars go into these developing areas as opposed to downtown where it's already developed. We want to develop these, more challenged areas and create jobs. So you get massive tax breaks for doing so. And again, these are areas that Tim has already got our entire team, all of our 14 teams that we work with. They're already experts in the opportunity zones. Isn't that exciting? That these are already their neighborhoods. They're getting calls from hedge funds. Every hedge fund is calling our team saying, we want to work with you. And you know what they're saying? They're committed to us, which is very, very exciting for us. They know that the hedge funds would be here today, gone tomorrow, but we'll be here for a long time. So we are their priority, which is great. And we're already set up. So this is the opportunity of 2019 for those of you who did want to sell a stock or a property and not pay capital gain on the new investment. All right, well, you already know about my show. I don't know if I got time for questions.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. All right, questions? None. There's got to be one. Somebody's got a question. Anything. Doesn't have to be on what I talked about. Where'd I get my dress?
Here's one right here in the middle.
I have a question about dividing, if you were to invest 10 properties in the opportunity zones, how would you split it among the zones? How many would you invest in each of the zones?
I would have to ask Ben. He's our investment counselor. How would you answer that?
I mean, that's such a personal question. I mean, it's always good to diversify. I wouldn't put all 10 of those properties in one market, just like I wouldn't buy all blue chip stocks, So maybe, but to put it in 10 different markets, your head would explode because now you're dealing with 10 different entities, 10 different people, 10 different property managers, 10 different. So maybe pick 2 markets and go into them, But I really want to look at the numbers and what the individual project was. I mean, we'll get into this later. I don't want to say anything I shouldn't, but you can buy an individual property, buy it for 50, put 50,000 minimum into it, but then you're managing that property, or you can invest into an ozone fund that's much more hands-off, and you're diversified in the sense that the fund is investing in multiple different markets, and you're just one out of hundreds of investors. So.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you pointed that out, that in order to get the tax benefits of the opportunity zones, there's a lot of tax rules, and you need to understand those first. But if you are not looking for the tax benefit and just want the cash flow and the gain, these are going to be great neighborhoods because so much money is going to be pouring in from all over the world of people trying to take advantage of those tax benefits. So the areas will come up in value. But if you want to invest in an opportunity zone fund, it has to be a fund, and you have to follow the rules. You either invest in someone else's fund, and we'll be talking about one later, or you start your own. And there's a lot of rules around that.
And the funny thing is, you think of ozones as being these down and out areas, and they aren't in all cases. There's obviously some political palms were greased or whatever when the governors decided what neighborhoods get to be put in the federal ozone program, but there's a lot of areas that are
Oh my
decent.
gosh. The Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, where all the job growth is happening in Reno and Sparks, that's an opportunity zone. It's amazing. I know we're looking at the property there. There's parts in San Jose and San Mateo. I mean, it's amazing. So just look on the map, and they're everywhere, and there's surprisingly many are not bad areas at all.
So we have time for one more question right there.
Okay. Well, he had his hand up.
Hi, I listened to your podcast. I really love it, and it's just amazing. It learned a lot. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
One question, I think part of the things that I've been listening to you is we're talking about multifamily market, investing in apartments and stuff, and compared to single family homes. Everywhere there's talk about the cap rates are contracting, and it's really a tough time to get in.
To multifamily?
Multifamily. And as a new investor in multifamily, I own a couple of single family and small duplexes and stuff like that, but do you recommend getting into multifamily at this time?
Yeah.
That's my first question.
Great question.
The second question is, let's say there is a recession or some sort of slump in jobs. So there's this argument that says people move at that time to apartments than renting single-family homes. There's also another argument that says, hey, because single-family home rents go down, people in apartments move to single-family
Right,
homes.
yeah.
So I'd like to,
So which is
get your
it?
take
Yeah.
on.
Okay. So to repeat the question, as a new investor, should I be going into multifamily or single family? And if there's a recession, which one will be more recession-proof? So the answer to that is I have no idea. But I will say that what I'm very concerned about is that we are in a phase of the market cycle where a lot of newbies are coming in. And that's scary because I go to events and I speak at events where a room is 2-3 times the size of this, all new investors learning how to syndicate. And if you don't know what syndication is, that is raising money from other people. Would you invest in someone who is just doing their first deal? I hope not. Say no. Say no. No. Okay. Unless they have somebody on the team that's experienced, right? I don't know how to build subdivisions, but we have, we work with builders who build subdivisions for 40 years, so you're in good hands. Don't ask me how to do it, but we got the right people. So if you're investing with someone who has a team, then that's one thing. But I am almost every month invited to these huge multifamily. I'm doing another one in a couple weeks. Big multifamily coaching programs where people are raising money. I mean, it is going to be a bloodbath in multifamily. So in my opinion, you should learn it and you should practice in single family and get ready and pick up the pieces in a couple of years. That's what we're going to do. In the meantime, we are building where it makes sense. You're going to hear later, we're going to be building a multifamily near the Trick Center in Reno that we're syndicating, sometimes it makes sense, but it's a bigger animal. So in multifamily, the part you're going to learn is how much money you can make. The part you're not learning is how much money you can lose. And you can lose much more than you can make. When you make a mistake in a single family, it doesn't devastate you the way that multifamily could if you get it wrong. So that's my simple advice is if you're new, make sure you have someone with over 30 years experience helping you in that asset class, in that area, because too many people are teaching and mentoring and coaching who have only been in it for 10 years or 8 years or 5 years. I know someone who's got a huge following and he's been doing it for 3 years. So he doesn't know what it's like to go through a downturn. It's very concerning. So so be careful. Don't fall into the hype around it. So the answer to the question is, in a downturn, where do people move? The people I know who have been through downturns will tell me that exactly what you said. B class is where you want to be, because as people lose jobs and as rents soften, now you've got B class properties cheaper, so the C class can move up. But the A class have lost their jobs and they move down. So you're kind of safe there, is what I've heard from people who've been through it.
B class single family or small apartments?
And it just depends. I mean, it always comes back to supply and demand, but kind of think about it. When Rich and I moved to Malibu, it was because it was a recession and we moved into a house we could never have afforded. But it was cheap, right? It was cheap then, it's not anymore, but it will be again.
Multifamily is nice because you got 3 or 4 doors and only one loan, so that's nice. But it's also a little bit riskier. You've got slightly higher turnover typically. In many towns, they're located in less desirable areas of towns. You have to be really careful, go see it, see how well it's maintained. And there's also a lot less of them available. So the demand is up, but there's less of them there. So it tends to drive prices up. And like Kathy said, a lot of people are jumping into this multifamily thing. You're kind of following the herd. But that's okay in some cases, but you have to be really careful where you go. Okay, guess what? We're right on time. I think we need to give Kathy a big hand.
All right.